couple of questions for yourself, Mr. Gallimore. Throughout the evidence we've had in the committee and some of the written evidence, you seem to be in a minority in terms of feeling that the assessment thresholds for EHCP plans are too low. We've asked a number of authorities that question, and Newham, for example, in the written evidence came back and said that no, they believe the threshold is appropriate for children with high needs. So why do you feel that way?
I think the phrase in there, the threshold test in terms of that a child or young person has or may have, and it's that may have bit that I struggle with, because I think we've got schools, and they're no different in East Sussex to around the country, who are very adept at very good at identifying and responding to the needs of their children and putting support services in place. And there is the notional £6,000 within their school budget in terms of enabling them to do that, and they can get on and do that. I think we're in danger of bringing far too many children and young people into a system that they don't need to be in, and then tying up resource in terms of assessing that need. I mean, if you use that threshold, you could probably apply it to about 11% of the school population, which seems to me to be misdirecting those much needed services and turning it into a quest to get the assessment, so to get the EHCP, rather than a quest to responding to and meeting the needs of that young person. And it feels to me that there should be an additional step, which isn't solely about whether that young person has got a special educational need or disability, but whether that young person's educational outcomes are not being met or we are failing to meet them. And there should be that additional threshold that sees EHCPs used for that group of young people. In any other area of work that I am involved in children's services, we don't start immediately at the top end. There is an expectation that we triage, that we try a range of services before moving into that specialist service provision. And it seems strange to me and to my authority that we start at that end rather than working through a process. There's
obviously an expectation within schools in terms of the support that they put in place and a graduated response to those needs. Obviously, in order to turn may have into a definitive answer, there needs to be some kind of assessment of that child's needs. So would you not feel that through that assessment process you might assess those children and say no, they don't need an EHCP plan, but this is the intervention that we're going to put in place instead?
I think it's a blunt and costly way to get to that point, and that we could do it, as I say, in other ways, and put in that link into outcome and attainment feels to me the right way to go in terms of that additional test before you embark on an EHCP, because I do think the minute you start going down that path, it all becomes about pushing for and getting that EHCP, and it's actually quite hard to get back off that track once you're on it, even in those instances where it would be appropriate to do that and still be able to meet the needs of that child or young person.
So to kind of clarify around the threshold, do you feel it's a threshold that's too low in a system of finite resource, or is it just altogether too low?
I mean, I think it's very hard to take out the finite resources that we are operating under. But I would still lean towards that approach, even if we were suddenly seeing the DFE, throwing money at us in terms of increasing the level of spend in this area. And frankly, that's just not going to happen.
Okay.
Go on, you go first.
So I'm just going to move on slightly to policies and lawfulness of policies. We've seen evidence in various authorities about additional paperwork and barriers to assessment. We've seen a letter from your inclusion service to schools suggesting that schools might want to avoid putting people forward for plans or might want to cease people's plans earlier. Given that that seems to create more difficulty than is actually required by the Children and Families Act in terms of getting an assessment, do you feel that's a lawful policy?
I mean, I think that in terms of the letter that you are referring to, I think that has been misconstrued. And if I start in the reverse order to which you asked the question, it seems odd to me that we operate in a world where we wouldn't see, or we couldn't see, the cessation of a plan as success. You know, and again, looking in other aspects of children's social care, there are other planning forward where we see the need for that child to remain subject of a plan, and coming off that plan, we see that as a sign of success. So again, it seems odd to me. And so we weren't saying, you know, hell and high water, get children and young people off these plans. What we were saying was, you need to keep this process under review to ascertain whether or not a child still needs to be subject of a plan. So that was our starting point. The early point is in terms of, it does go back to, actually, there is a finite pot of money, and it's important that the right children are accessing that money quickly, speedily, to ensure that they get great outcomes. That's really important. So it is just it is a reminder to people to be thinking about, and not just knee-jerking to an assumption that all children need an EHCP plan to achieve their aims. And I think in part that goes back to my views about where the threshold is currently set.
So you accept that there are additional paperwork and evidence barriers to assessment in your authority?
No, I wouldn't say that there are additional barriers. I would say what we is that we try and work with all the partners in the process to ascertain it is the right children are receiving the right education in the right place.
It's been suggested to us that you require more paperwork and more evidence to be submitted than the Act lays out.
I mean, certainly I am not aware of that. I think it is right and proper that we seek appropriate assessments, and I am aware that we don't simply accept what is being said and some of the assessments that we are provided with, and we will seek an alternative. And I would now want really stress to this committee, if we believe it is in the best interest of that child or young person to do that. And I think we are a service that tries to be focused on the needs of that child and young person.